Big story that we're tracking this evening. The United States and European Union countries, at least 10 countries from the EU, have joined hands to take on Russia over the UK spy poisoning case. The US has expelled 60 Russian diplomats in response to the UK spy poisoning case. Among those expelled are Russian officials working at the United Nations. 12 of them, the US claims they are spies. The White House has issued a statement saying it has also decided to shut down the Seattle consulate in response to the spy poisoning case in the UK. Germany and Poland have expelled 4 diplomats each, while Lithuania has thrown out 3 Russian diplomats. Lithuania has also banned 44 Russians from entering the country. Ukraine, which is not a member of the European Union, will throw out 13 Russian diplomats. This comes weeks after the UK expelled 23 Russian diplomats. Russia has hit back by expelling an equal number of British diplomats. Joining us from Washington is WION correspondent Nina Maria Potts. Good evening, Nina. This was an expected line, would you say, despite the president's silence on this spy poisoning case?
Well, in its strongest statement yet, I would say, in an unprecedented move, as you say, the US has announced that it will be expelling in total 60 Russian diplomats, officials who are working currently in the United States in solidarity with the UK. We were warned by the State Department sometime last week that there would be actions moving forward in coordination with the European Union. We've just heard that it's in fact 14 EU countries that are planning to take action and carry out similar expulsions. In the statement, the US says that it's going to be expelling 48 Russian officials currently serving at the bilateral mission to the United States. They're also demanding that Russia closes its consulate general in Seattle, as you rightly mentioned, giving them until April the 2nd. So, in fact, only 7 days to shut down operations. And they've targeted the consulate general in Seattle because of its proximity to a submarine base. And you rightly mentioned that they will also be expelling 12 intelligence operatives from the Russian mission to the United Nations. The US saying that those officials have abused their privileged status in the United States. This move, as you rightly said, coming on the back of the tit-for-tat between the UK and Russia on the expulsion of 23 diplomats on both sides. A strong sign of solidarity. President Trump did indicate earlier this month that he was going to point the finger of blame at Moscow for targeting and carrying out this chemical weapons attack on this Russian spy in the United Kingdom. And finally, I think the US taking some action, although from the State Department we're also hearing a strong line that they are going out to defend their record on imposing new sanctions on Russia, pointing to the sanctions that they issued over Russia's involvement in Ukraine. So definitely a beefing up, I would say, in the United States response.
Do we expect a statement from the president himself, who has been conspicuous by his silence, even though he had a telephonic conversation with President Putin only last week to congratulate him for his re-election?
It would be difficult to imagine that President Trump will stay silent. This information coming from a background briefing earlier this morning, which was embargoed until 9 a.m. We did have indications that the president would be taking this action. So it's hard to see how he stays silent. As you rightly mentioned, he's facing his own investigation. He's having trouble at the moment holding a legal team together because he does seem intent on pursuing a face-to-face conversation with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. This is over the allegations that are swimming around President Trump's White House that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia over election meddling in the 2016 presidential election. I think that the situation between Russia and the UK makes it extremely difficult for the president to stay silent on Russia anymore. And I think this has led directly to a robust response from the US in direct connection to the spy scandal.
My final question to you, Nina. This makes for a for a good headline, 60 diplomats expelled, and I would assume that it also impacts the way two countries function together, how they coordinate on various issues. But beyond that, is this largely a symbolic gesture? Is this expulsion indefinite for an indefinite period of time, or are these people going to be called back? What is going to resolve this? Will it be talks from both sides? Is this the end of diplomatic engagements between the two countries? For a layperson, what does this expulsion really mean?
On a pragmatic level, the State Department certainly, and this was certainly true under the Obama administration, and is also true under the current administration, that on a pragmatic level, the US and Russia will have to find ways of working together and collaborating on a whole host of global issues, including the fight against terror. The war in Syria obviously has been a very divisive issue, pitting the US against Russia at various points along the way. But there are global issues when it comes to North Korea that the Russians and the Americans still have to keep on talking. And I think that the US is acutely aware of that. So whether or not the move is permanent, hard to say, but it's unusual in the sense that the US has given these diplomats and Russian intelligence officials very little time to move on and move out. Normally, you see a period between 24 hours notice and 2 weeks. We've got 7 days here to kick them out of the country. So I would say that the best case scenario right now is that tensions are very high, but it's hard to see how they would stay permanently not talking to each other. It cannot be the end of all diplomacy, certainly.
Indeed. Nina Maria Potts, thanks very much for putting this in perspective for our viewers. 60 Russian diplomats expelled by the US administration. This is the biggest such move, as we've been saying, since the Ronald Reagan administration did it way back in 1986. That's when they asked 55 Russians to leave the country. So, and 10 European Union nations are also mulling similar measures. So, pressure building on Russia, at least in that spy poisoning case.